Today I'll be responding to the claim that the prohibition of marijuana is more harmful to society than beneficial. My opponent's secondary claims were: 1, the prohibition of marijuana can cause more health risks to users; 2, the prohibition endangers people more than it protects them; and 3, prohibition does more economic harm than good. I'd like to start off by saying that the legalization of marijuana won't stop the health effects that it has connected to it. I'd like to start off by saying that marijuana is like no other crop that has been seen here before, because we don't need farms to produce it. Anybody could produce it in their backyard, which makes it very hard to find quality products. My opponent used the case of someone who was paralyzed for 3 days because they were handling marijuana in a medical marijuana dispensary. Well, this dispensary was government owned, and they show no signs of checking the quality. If it's being government run and people are still getting paralyzed from it, the system's not working. There are also other health risks. He also mentioned that the long-term health risks aren't any more dangerous than any other thing that you smoke, which is true. But marijuana is still a drug, and it still alters your state, and this can lead to other health problems, including the damage to innocent people. Dr. Robert DuPont, the ex-president of the Institute for Behavior and Health and the ex-director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, said that in a study of seriously injured drivers admitted to a level 1 shock trauma center, more than a quarter of all drivers, 26.9%, tested positive for marijuana. In a study of fatally injured drivers in Washington State, 12.7% tested positive for marijuana. These studies demonstrate a high prevalence of drug driving as a result of marijuana use. My opponent also attacked the validity of the statement that marijuana is a gateway drug by using the quote that marijuana use is not linked by a high enough margin to other harder drugs. But this is an interpretation of data rather than data itself. The data itself, taken by the Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University, found that adolescents who smoke pot are 85 times more likely to use cocaine than their non-pot smoking peers, and that 60% of youngsters who use marijuana will, before they turn 15, later go on to use cocaine. Now, regardless of the interpretation, it'll be true to say that where there's use of marijuana, there will be more use of harder drugs. Which leads to my second point, which is the legalization of marijuana will not protect people from the black market. Marijuana does not account for most of the income of the black market. Kevin A. Sabat, who works for the Office of National Drug Control Policy, said that legalizing marijuana in no way would ensure that the most vicious drug-related problems, violence, economic-related crimes, street game activity, would disappear. Most of these problems stem from cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine markets. Marijuana's share of the black market is modest. The cocaine market is 3 times larger. Now, if marijuana is legalized and it does lead to the use of harder drugs, then this may actually help the cartels in their business with cocaine and methamphetamine. Leading to my third point, which is the legalization of marijuana will burden the economy more than it will help it. Dr. DuPont again comments that alcohol-related costs relating marijuana to other substances that are legal, alcohol-related costs total over $185 billion, while federal and states collected an estimated $14.5 billion in tax revenue. Similarly, tobacco uses costs over $200 billion, but only $25 billion is collected in taxes. These figures show that the cost of legal alcohol are more than 12 times the total tax revenue collected, and that the costs of legal tobacco are about 8 times the tax revenue collected, and this is an economically disastrous trade-off. Not to mention that the claim that marijuana will be our #1 cash crop is false, because we can't even export it, seeing as how marijuana is illegal in most of the world. And if it becomes legal, it will be more expensive than producing it. And why would people just go to a dispensary when they could just obtain it the way they've been obtaining it, cheaper? At this point, I'd like to recap my statements that the prohibition of marijuana is safer for the people, that legalization won't stop the problems, and that legalization will actually burden the economy more than help it. And I hope that I've persuaded you that legalization of marijuana is not the best way to deal with the problems that comes with it.
All right. You labeled the claims at the beginning pretty clearly, but when you got to the first point, it didn't seem like it was as well structured as it was going to be. Pardon me. You make an issue about home production of it. You're talking about the one case of the person who supposedly got paralyzed there. You talked about long-term health issues. So there are actually a number of minor issues here, and just a few structural claims would make that a little bit stronger. I thought you had very good evidence on some of the negative effects, especially to other people. The statistics that you had on injuries and fatalities was pretty solid. And then the relationship of the argument to, I don't know if you use the term gateway drug, but the notion that there would be a likely consequence of increased use of other drugs. I thought that that's a good claim there. Your whole argument about his position being an interpretation of the data versus the data itself, I think that you just need to say, here's what it ends up meaning, even if the advocate is correct, that it's not going to be that way for everybody. We do know that this is a consequence of this action, and so it's going to feed your argument on the second point. The second point I thought was a little bit more clearly labeled. You had a couple of good points there. Let me see. Oh, and I like the argument that you have about alcohol and tobacco. I think one of the things that you want to stress is that the advocate uses these as comparisons for making inferences, and if they're legitimate bases for making an inference, then we ought to be able to make a similar inference about what the negative costs of marijuana would be, including damage to other people, problems to the economy, and perhaps the black market issue that you come up with, which I thought was actually nicely explained. All right, thank you.